What exactly are we saying when we stand up and raise our right hand and promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? And recently, I got a chance to try and figure this out. I belong to a study group composed of other UU ministers, and each year we meet to hear 4 papers and 4 responses on a chosen topic. Then we choose the topic for the following year. If one is asked to do a paper, one cannot say no unless it is a life or death excuse. And I didn't have one when I was called and asked to write a paper on truth. The topic for that year was speech. You can guess where interest in freedom of speech and press and interest in truth came from when we were making the decision in November of 2014. The years following have only accelerated that interest. Studying up for this paper got intense. It turns out resources on truth were not necessarily in one category of resources, but under sociology and philosophy and psychology and economics and current events and history, etc. And I found all sorts of magazine articles on it. Friends sent references they thought would be helpful, including a chunk from The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shire. And when I thought I had finished this paper, a book was recommended called Being Wrong. On the whole, getting my mind around the topic was like putting one's hand around an elephant-sized chunk of wet soap. When I described the paper for a UU friend, she suggested 2 parts of which she would like to know more. So when I did my usual thing of creating a sermon from what I had learned, I remembered what had intrigued her. Did you know that there's more than one way to define truth? Western cultures and Eastern ones have traditions that take off in different directions. And in our postmodern age, Eastern concepts have become incorporated into Western concepts. But let's start with definitions. Then we can tear them down or illustrate them. It's more fun that way. The Encyclopedia Britannica defines truth as follows. Truth in metaphysics and the philosophy of language is the property of sentences, assertions, beliefs, thoughts, or propositions that are said in ordinary discourse to agree with the facts or to state what is the case. During my undergraduate studies, I went to the University of Leeds, England, for a year studying history of art and practical art. And one of my tutorials, which was a small group seminar, was led by Quentin Bell, who's the nephew of Virginia Woolf, was also chair of the department. And at the first meeting, we were given an essay to write. The subject was the pre-Raphaelite paintings in the main library. We turned in the papers at the end of the week. And when we met next, Professor Bell began by saying, "One of you in this group is an American and the rest are English educated. I can tell who the American is not just by the style of handwriting," English right up and down like this, "but also because Americans think that opinions are facts." It seems opinions are not sufficient for scholastic work. So if truth is based on facts, what are facts? In the construction of life, if truth is the penthouse, then facts are the foundation blocks reaching down into the bedrock. Says the Cambridge English Dictionary, facts are something that is known to have happened or to exist, especially something for which proof exists, about which there is information. This is a pragmatic definition of truth and facts, the one that is the bedrock of modernism. We have lived as modernists since the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment got those ideas from reading Greek philosophers and scientists. It is the language of the scientific method and most of the education of people over 50 in this room, including me. The second definition of truth is based on relativism, which is what the Buddha was using when he told his monks that they each held the truth even though they differed. In postmodern thought, that which has followed the period of modernism, it is also the definition of truth. If everyone has a trove of his or her own experiences that makes each person unique, then truth must arise from many different perspectives. What would I see in an accident that we both witnessed? What I would see is not the same as what you would see. Therefore, there is not just one truth, but as many as there are people to observe it. We are familiar with this system in our system of justice. It's well known to lawyers and prosecutors that what one witness says happened might well be countered by another. And they both saw the same thing happening. And they both can, with clear conscience, swear that they are telling the truth. My son, who is a lawyer, he grew up arguing with me, it was his right profession, says that for the most part, the courts must start with the idea that there is only one truth. He is himself a relativist, but operates in his profession as a modernist. But he also notes that juries will believe the person whom they trust the most. That is the person they will decide is telling the truth. Well, in writing my paper, all that got me quite confused. Lots more reading gave me clues as to what each system means by truth and where that takes us. One of those pieces of reading was an article by a man whose last name was Yagoda in the Atlantic magazine titled, "Your Lying Mind," and he didn't mean resting. What it addresses is the biases which govern our thinking and which are almost impossible to overcome. When you say they like going to church because they are in a group of like-minded people, I think, oh no. What happened to our acclaimed love of diversity when we say that? Oops. But confirmation bias is one of our strongest urges. It is the idea that the person who agrees with me is right. When I read a newspaper article and the information it communicates agrees with what I believe, then it is usual for me to think that information is right, that it is the truth. Yagoda says in his article that over 117 biases are listed by Wikipedia, which is always a great source of information. And these are hardwired into our brains. They all served purposes in our ancient past, but in today's information overload world, usually they help us to limit what we absorb in order to make decisions and not fall under the weight of too much information. Another form of bias, labeled the endowment effect, was brought to light by Richard Thaler, an economist from the University of Chicago who recently won a Nobel Prize. He and an associate found that people put an irrationally high value on something they possess, as opposed to what they do not possess. The results of their experiments crossed class, gender, and racial boundaries, unlike previous economic theories that had put forth the effect that what one actually owned over what one just talked about or knew diminished with time. And all things reverted to a market value that did not depend on ownership. Toller et al. Proved this was not true. For all persons across race, class, ethnic group, religions, etc., possession is indeed 9/10 of thinking as well as of the law. So my breed of dog is, of course, better than anyone else's, no matter what you think, just because it's the dog that I possess. In order to change someone's mind, one has to try to move aside these biases. And attempts to do so have proven neither likely nor long-lasting. So what does it tell you about education and concepts of beliefs about what is true? Unfortunately, for those of us who want to believe that a good education will cure the world of obvious untruths, it just isn't so. A good education can teach people discernment skills in evaluating other people's biases or truths. In other words, can teach us to think. It also can teach us about things we never thought of before. It can even teach us to doubt our own truths. But it will probably not erase our innermost ideas about what is true and what is not. Politics is looking even bleaker here, isn't it? The work of Yuval Noah Harari in his latest book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, points out that we live via stories. These stories defined what we consider proper and good behavior, ranging from how we brush our teeth, why we brush our teeth, and what we think people should do to live meaningful lives. So each person, he writes, is a mass of stories. Some are hounded down through eons or generations. Some are learned as we go along. It is from these stories that we discern what truth is, says Harari. The savvy politician figures out what people want to hear and tells them just that in terms of the stories that they believe. People can be manipulated as to where to place their anger and direct their fear if you know what those angers and fears are and what they believe is a good target for them. Hitler and the Nazis did this very well, creating an information machine that bolstered what people were inclined to think and hid a lot of what they did not want to hear. Hitler never told the German nation that conquering Europe would mean a devastating war. Instead, he told them of the heroes, heroines, and ideals of the stories behind Wagner's operas, stories which previous generations had told them were true because they believed the propaganda that started this whole scene as a true story of the Germanic race. Its glory and its inevitable place at the top of the human line was illustrated. And then Hitler told them that, of course, because they were at the top of the human race, they would have the superior battlefield machines and energy and strategy, and that because of their superiority, conquering the world would make it a better place. It didn't, did it? What stories do you believe because you've been told them from early childhood? That the American concept of democracy allows the most freedom and fulfillment possible for human beings? That it is our mission to see that it's spread throughout the world as a way of making peace and fulfillment possible? These are stories too. And the closer that other countries come to following our pattern, the more we like them and trust them. Of course we do. It's confirmation bias all the way. And that feels good. Out of our stories come what we hold as true. And out of that, we determine where we will give our energies, find our meaning, and fashion a way of life. Another book or line of thinking was revelatory to me, too. It's a book called Being Wrong by Kathleen Schultz. She's a journalist intrigued by human nature, and she's won prestigious prizes from the Pew Foundation for her work. This book draws from the observation that we humans strive to be right and call being right the natural and good human behavior. But, says Schultz, most of the time we are wrong. Instead of recognizing the value of being wrong, we are ashamed. But there are great benefits in being wrong about our conclusions. Being right about something brings about stasis. It shuts down doubt and thus curiosity and growth. We think, Schultz says, not logically, but intuitively, using inductive reasoning. We draw conclusions out of what we know. Harari would say, out of the stories we already know and practice. A baby learns what a dog is by hearing something called that, which has a certain shape and movement, etc. It can even be a prelingual discernment, the thing that doesn't have to be associated with the name dog, but just be what has been experienced, which later gets that name. The baby then knows what a dog is without any further research, carrying that knowledge to the end of his or her life. Every time that shape or movement or sound appears, the mind will say, dog, and it doesn't have to relearn it each time. We do the same thing over and over with everything we encounter. It is from these experiences that we draw in our intuitive or inductive reasoning. And, says Schultz, most of the time our inductive and intuitive reasoning is correct. It leads us to conclusions that work for us and for others. But we become fearful when we have no experiential orientation for something we come upon. Sometimes we become curious in those circumstances, but only if we feel safe. The same is true for what we believe is true about life or what it should be. The new thing is introduced with a story that we can relate to, then we can accept it as true. Otherwise, it's foreign or alien, as a favorite word calls it these days. The children's story for this morning, The Empty Bowl, showed what happened when children were afraid to be wrong. They cheated. Even Ping felt afraid and ashamed, but he didn't lie about it. That, says the book, is true strength, not necessarily being what we think is right, but instead not lying. I know of a certain politician that I wish had been read that story over and over in his infancy. Only by not insisting that we are right, that the elephant is a stringy rope, but rather by listening to the possibilities around us, can we figure out what an elephant really is. We need to build bridges between us. We need to dialogue. We may be wrong, but maybe the truth will still be elusive, but at least we will have lots of good company on the road.